Chapter 7 1 week. It has been a week. Charlie at the dining room window chews her lip and scratches the poison ivy rash on the inside of her elbow as she watches Coyote sneak up to the bowl of food at the end of the driveway. He still refuses to eat unless she is all the way inside the house with the door closed. A whole week she has been feeding him and there's been no change at all. No, she thinks, there's been a change all right. In the wrong dog. Sadie doesn't go home anymore as soon as they get to Charlie's house. Charlie can't put Coyote's food out while Sadie's there, or Sadie will eat it. So she has to tie her to the railing by the side door till Coyote's finished. The first time she tied her, Charlie took Sadie a couple of biscuits after she put Coyote's food out for him, so Sadie wouldn't feel left out. The dog books are right about patterns and routine. Sadie expects the tying now, and the biscuits. Every day when Coyote has eaten, Charlie unties Sadie, and Sadie hangs around for a while before she goes home, hoping, Charlie thinks, for more biscuits. Coyote, still standing as far from the food bowl as he can, stretches his head down and snatches a few mouthfuls before backing away and checking for danger. It's almost as if he's two different creatures. The regular dog that trots along the trail or frolics with Sadie, and the wild one, the wary, terrified one Charlie's watching now. He looks exactly the way he did the very first day. His tail is down, his ears back, every muscle in his body tense and ready to run. She doesn't understand why he's so frightened. It can't be just that he's wild. Wild animals come to food. When they used to have bird feeders, the birds came right away to get the seed. And squirrels. They used to raid the feeders and wouldn't back off even if you pounded on the windows. Her mother would... Charlie stops the thought and pushes that memory away. The point is that even with a person a few feet away stomping and yelling at them, squirrels, fully wild creatures, are more interested in food than afraid of people. For Coyote, it is different. Why? What could his life have been like before he came to Eagle Lake? Without Charlie's intending it, an image forms in her mind. A man's putting food at the edge of a mowed yard where the woods begin. She closes her eyes and gives herself over to the images, like watching a movie in her mind. Setting the bowl down, the man slips behind a bush a few feet away. There's a car parked on a gravel drive nearby. Another man is crouched behind the car, waiting. Coyote, nose up, materializes out of the woods. As he approaches the food, the men pounce. He is picked up and carried, struggling, to a small shed and locked inside. Charlie shivers and opens her eyes. This really happened, she thinks. She feels it the way she felt the dog's terror as he struggled to get free of the men holding him. No wonder Coyote's so wary about being fed. All this time she's been counting on food to win him over. The books say that dogs bond readily to the person who feeds them. Feeding Coyote is supposed to show him that she's a friend, someone he can trust. But it's doing the opposite. Putting that bowl out every day only proves to him that she's dangerous, a threat, like the animal control people Mrs. Davis called. No wonder the can of tuna they said that would lure any dog into a trap didn't work. Coyote understands about food and humans. Food in traps. Charlie pulls a chair away from the dining room table and sits down by the window. There's nothing in the dog training books that will help her solve this problem. Nothing about working with a wild, terrified dog you can't touch or even get close to. A dog you can't collar or cage or corral. She feels like crying. She'll have to rethink her whole plan. Plan? As if she's really had one. All there was to it was the idea that walking him around the lake and feeding him every day would get him to trust her. The taming was supposed to happen all by itself. Food good. Charlie gives food. Charlie good. Like that. Everyone at Eagle Lake knows now that Charlie is trying to do. Mrs. Jensen, the retired librarian who used to babysit her when she was little, is the editor of Tail Feathers, the newsletter that went into everybody's boxes over the weekend. She wrote a story about Charlie and Coyote and asked anyone who might have been feeding him to stop so that Charlie would be the only one that he could go to for food. Yesterday, when Charlie got around to the Davises' house, Mrs. Davis and Sadie were on the road with Mr. and Mrs. Sutcliffe and their Labrador retriever, Boone, and Mrs. Hobbs with her little white dog, Pandy. They'd all told her what a good thing she was doing. All the time they were standing in the road talking, the dogs, including Coyote, had played in the Davises' yard. But when the Sutcliffes and Mrs. Hobbs went on with their walk and Mrs. Davis went inside, Coyote disappeared into the woods. What besides food does she have to offer this dog? A place to live, but he has that. It isn't very comfortable, just a bare spot under a tree. If he were really wild, a fox or a coyote, he wouldn't have any more than that. A den, maybe. Coyote could probably dig himself a den if he wanted one, if he needed one. She can offer him companionship, but he has Sadie and the other dogs. Why would he want companionship with a human? Mrs. Hobbs told her yesterday that Coyote used to follow anyone who walked a dog around the lake, staying mostly out of sight in the woods, but still following. It wasn't just the other dogs he was following. He wants a family. You can see it in his eyes. Charlie wonders if that could be true. She thinks of the connection she felt with him the first time she saw him. It wasn't just from her to him. It was from him to her, too. He does want a family. He's just too afraid to know how to make it happen. She looks at him now, finishing the last of the food, backing away toward the woods. He needs me, she thinks. Coyotes and foxes and wolves know how to live in the wild. Dogs don't. What about winter? Every year on really cold nights they tell people on the evening news to bring their dogs inside or make sure they have a warm, insulated shelter to go to. Coyote won't have that. He needs me. He does. She has to come up with a way to make herself more to him than a person who just puts food out for him. Stop that scratching! Sarita has left her jigsaw puzzle and come into the dining room. Don't you know that hot water trick? Charlie hasn't realized she's scratching her arm again. What trick? Run water as hot as you can stand it on that rash until it doesn't itch anymore. That'll stop the itching all day. 8 hours anyway. Do it again before you go to bed and it won't itch in the night either. Stupid old wives' tale, Charlie thinks. If that worked, why wouldn't everybody know how to do it? How do you know? Sarita's eyes flash. Because I know everything. Yeah, right. You can do it or you can go on itching. It's up to you. Charlie decides to try it. Sarita follows her into the kitchen. So, she says, not much change in that wild dog. Charlie tests the water to see how hot it is and puts her arm under the faucet. How long do I have to do this? Like I said, till it stops itching. People caught him before with food before, Charlie says. She doesn't mention how she knows this. Feeding scares him. I need to do something that'll give him a reason to like me. If you know everything, tell me what to do. What do other dogs like people for? Charlie realizes the poison ivy really has stopped itching. She turns off the water. Playing, I guess. Fetch, catch. He isn't a regular dog. He doesn't do that stuff. Sadie does, Sarita says. When Charlie goes out to untie Sadie, Sadie frisks around her, front paws splayed, head down, her back end in the air, tail wagging. She's begging Charlie to play. Sarita's certainly right about Sadie. Charlie leans down to get a dead branch that is falling off one of the trees by the carport. As soon as she picks it up, Sadie leaps for it, trying to snatch it away. Down, Charlie says, holding it as high in the air as she can. She throws the stick up the slope of the driveway toward where Coyote's watching from the safety of the trees. Go get it, Sadie! The dog doesn't need the words. Of course not, Charlie thinks, watching her tear off after the stick. Golden retriever. Charlie calls to Sadie to bring back the stick. She isn't as good as letting go as she is at retrieving, but Charlie manages to get it away from her and throw it again. Ears flying, Sadie runs after the stick and Charlie moves up the drive, keeping an eye on Coyote, who's sitting in a tangle of honeysuckle on the other side of the road. This is what dogs and people do together, she thinks at him. Sadie drops the stick and backs away from it, wagging. Charlie picks it up and Sadie begins to bark, urging her to throw it. Coyote's standing now, ears and tail up, following every movement. His tail has begun to wag. When Charlie throws the stick, Sadie gets it, and Coyote comes out of the woods to join the game, chasing Sadie. After a few minutes, Sadie drops the stick, and the game becomes our usual chase and grab. So focused is Coyote that he doesn't notice when Charlie moves into the middle of the yard so that the dogs have to swerve around her as they run, the way they swerve around the azaleas. At last, Sadie, tongue hanging out, flops onto the grass a few feet from where Charlie's standing. Coyote circles, barking a high-pitched bark, snapping at Sadie's ears, her feet urging her up again. When she doesn't respond, he gives up and sinks to the ground next to her. It's the closest Charlie has ever been to him. Over Sadie's shoulder, Coyote looks directly at Charlie, his tongue, too, hanging out as he pants. There are big splotches of blue on his long pink tongue. Charlie has never seen anything like it. Blue spots on his tongue, Sarita says later. That's chow. Mama or Daddy or Grandma maybe. That dog's got chow in him somewhere. She's leaning over her jigsaw puzzle, squinting at a piece in her hand. So, Charlie says, what does that mean? It means you don't tell your father yet. Chows have a bad rep in the dog world. Blue tongue's likely to scare Paul Morgan off. End you up with some little beagle pup. Some chihuahua. What's the bad rep? Sarita makes a little satisfied as she puts the puzzle piece into place. Aggressive, protective, one-man dogs, they say. One family, anyway. Coyote's not aggressive, not even with dogs, and he doesn't have a family. Sarita shrugs and takes another piece from a cookie sheet full of bits in the sky. Not now, anyway. You itchin', by the way? Charlie looks at the rash on her arm, surprised. No! Don't mess with me, girl. Charlie sees a cloud piece in the place in the puzzle where it will fit and puts it in. You go rest that leg, Sarita says, slapping at Charlie's hand. You been outside too long today. Sarita is right, Charlie realizes when she settles into the recliner. Her leg, her whole body has been getting stronger this week, the walk leaving her with more energy and less pain. But after nearly 2 hours with the dogs, throwing a stick for Sadie sometimes, or just sitting on the fender of Sarita's car in the shade of the carport watching them, she's worn out. When Sadie finally swam home, her tail wagging as she went, throwing drops of water that glittered in the sun, Coyote followed her to the water line, stood with his front feet in the water, whining. Come back, he seemed to be calling to her. It was as if a bungee cord stretched between those two dogs, pulling harder and harder as Sadie swam away. When she reached the other side and pulled herself out of the water next to the Davises' dock, Coyote gave one last exasperated whine and launched himself into the water, swimming with his ears back, his tail completely underwater. The contrast between the way Sadie swam, splashing and wagging, and Coyote's grim determination made Charlie laugh. This was clearly a dog who hated to swim. When he got to the other side, he dragged himself out of the water exactly where Sadie had, shook himself, and followed her up into the trees. Charlie flips the lever on the recliner and leans back, her legs stretched out in front of her. She needs to break that bungee cord that links the dogs, she thinks as she picks up the remote and turns on the television. Better yet, she needs to find a way to transfer the bungee from Sadie to herself. Chapter 8. Sadie. The next day, when Charlie gets to the top of the hill by Crazy Sherman, Sadie doesn't come to her whistle. Charlie doesn't see either dog, and she's all the way to the Davises' driveway before she realizes why. The SUV is gone, and Sadie is chained to a tree down near the house. Straining at the end of her chain, she barks and jumps towards Charlie, her front feet pawing the air. Coyote is lying under a rhododendron bush only a few feet from the tree that Sadie's chained to. His ears are up, and he's watching Charlie. Mrs. Davis has given her permission to unchain Sadie if she wants to, but Charlie decides to leave Sadie chained and try to lure Coyote around the lake on his own. She throws Sadie a biscuit to make up for leaving her. Come on, she calls to Coyote, let's walk. At the word, Coyote comes out from under the rhododendron, his tail wagging. Charlie drops a biscuit on the driveway. That's yours, she tells him, and walks away from it toward the road. With her mirror, she checks to see if he's coming to get the biscuit. He does. Let's go get lunch, she says, and keeps walking. But he doesn't follow her. In the mirror, she sees that he has stopped in the driveway, ears and tail down. He turns and looks back at Sadie, who's barking now and straining at the leash. Charlie can almost feel that bungee cord pulling him back. The books would call this a training opportunity. She should just go on, whether he follows or not. If he doesn't come around to get his lunch today, he'll learn a lesson. He'll know to walk with her tomorrow. Lunch, she calls again. She puts the mirror away and starts walking again. Every living thing is a spirit. This time, Charlie doesn't try to push her mother's voice out of her mind. That was what her mother believed. Charlie does too. The books are about training, controlling, human to dog. Charlie wants to work with Coyote spirit to spirit. She doesn't have a book for that. Coyote needs Sadie with him to feel safe, Charlie thinks. She understands. It's like the way she needed Amy with her on the first day of middle school. She goes back, takes Sadie off her chain, and watches the two dogs run a huge circle around the yard, bumping into each other, grabbing at each other's ears. Let's walk, she tells them, and they begin the walk in the way that was come to be their pattern, Sadie dashing ahead of her, Coyote following. Near the bottom of the hill, Coyote is far behind, and Sadie comes bounding back, as she always does, as if to see what's taken Charlie so long. But this time, she makes a lunge for Charlie's walking stick and pulls it out of her hand. Charlie has to grab a kudzu vine to keep from falling. Sadie drags the stick a few feet off the trail and drops it. Then she stands by it, looking up at Charlie, her tongue hanging out, her tail wagging. This isn't a game, Charlie says. I need that stick. Bring it back. Sadie gives herself a shake and trots off down the hill and across the embankment. Charlie lets go of the kudzu vine and goes to get the stick, moving carefully over uneven ground through the leaf cover. Throwing sticks was a mistake yesterday. Now Sadie thinks the walking stick is a toy. She picks it up and starts back toward the trail. Sadie comes flying back, grabs the stick and tugs, nearly pulling Charlie off her feet. Charlie has to let go of it to keep from falling. Sadie trots off with the stick, carrying it back through that poison ivy down to the edge of the pond. Then she wades out into the water until it's up to her chest and drops the stick into the water. To get the stick this time, Charlie will have to plow through the poison ivy, maybe wade into the pond. She looks to see where Coyote is and sees that he has stopped at the base of the hill. When she turns toward him, he watches instead of skittering off into the trees. Sadie, still standing in the water, barks. Then she splashes along the edge of the pond, bounds across the spillway, shakes herself, and starts up the hill on the other side. Charlie, furious, stands a while longer, trying to figure out if she can get her stick back, and then gives up. She'll just have to find a replacement in the woods as she goes. When she gets to the spillway, she realizes that walking without her stick doesn't hurt much more than walking with it, at least on level ground. Charlie steps carefully, gingerly across the spillway, balancing with her arms out on both sides as she steps from one broken chunk of concrete to the next. When she has made it to the other side, she uses the dangling root to pull herself up to the fallen tree and climbs on it. Coyote, a few feet back on the trail, stops, waits until she's settled, then runs across the spillway and up the trail to catch up with Sadie. He passes no more than a foot from where Charlie is sitting. She listens to the dogs tussling with each other somewhere up the hill. Coyote has always stayed behind her, ready to leap off the trail if she turns toward him. He could have gone around her, could have caught up with Sadie any time. Has it been her walking stick keeping him back? Has he been afraid to be out ahead where he can't keep an eye on the human with the stick? Charlie laughs. It's almost as if Sadie knew that. Charlie wonders if she can manage the rest of the walk without the stick. "Till you don't need it anymore," was all Tony said when she asked how long she had to use it. Maybe, just maybe, she's done with the stick. It isn't only Coyote who will be glad if she is. Progress. Her father will be thrilled.